Well, greetings, programs. Unless you've been hiding underneath a rock for the past week or so, you've known that on Saturday the 23rd, Thunderfoot and D-Land and Cole had a discussion about the substantive issues that Mr. Cole had with Thunderfoot's position on Islam. Now, this is more or less a video that's going to go through some of the points, certainly not all of them. But also I'd like to address some of Thunderfoot's attitudes and debating tactics during the past year. The first thing I'd like to bring up is, of course, his cherry picking. He has not only been cherry picking arguments, he has been cherry picking who he has been arguing against. For instance, for arguments, he will ignore people like, say, it's the Superfly when he brings up a counterpoint to Thunderfoot's Bible readings, or ignore Got That Funk entirely when he brings up, say, something like, that reasons why he thinks that Thunderfoot is a bigot. The only people he seems to engage are people he thinks that he can either squash rather easily, or people that he simply can't ignore, like, say, Coughlin. Also, as far as cherry-picking the arguers and the arguments at the same time, this brings us to the raspberry. I was one of the people who gave Thunderfoot the raspberry, and I'm quite unapologetic about it. This was, of course, not an argument. This was a protest to the way Thunderfoot has been acting over the past year. For Thunderfoot to cherry-pick that video, and by the way, Fleeta the Geek did not put that up as a video response to Thunderfoot. So, yeah, obviously he had to, either it's in the sidebar, or he had to look for it. It's one of the two options after that. If that's not cherry picking, I don't know what is. And to state that that was an argument and all that we had to say was, once again, oversimplifying things. Another debating tactic that has been torquing my gears as of late is his total and complete dismissal of arguments. One of the ways he has been doing this is through ad hominem attacks. And of course, related to that, he has a tendency to debate people, not the issues. He was always saying he was going to have a discussion or a debate with D-Land and Cole rather than a discussion about the points he brought up. The thing is that you're not debating people, you're debating points that they bring up, which makes me think that perhaps Thunderfoot is taking this just a little bit too seriously. But anyway, this brings us to the ad hominem attacks that he has clearly made against Richard the Dick Coughlin. Calling him a childish emo whore, an attention whore, and of course that wonderful video where he made a psychological analysis, even though he certainly is not a psychological professional. But going to that video where he made that psychological analysis, basically to believe that point that a type of mental illness suddenly makes anything you say null and void is ridiculous. The greatest example I can think of this is, of course, Dr. John Nash, who won the Nobel Prize for group theory. Just because Dr. John Nash also suffers from schizophrenia does not mean that Dr. Nash is not also a genius, but also obviously quite brilliant in other ways as well. And in fact, I think that Thunderfoot really needs to get off his high horse and apologize to Coughlin. What he did was just incredibly ridiculous, and that's a cheap shot we would expect from people like Brett Keane. Not something I, at least at the time, would have expected from someone like Thunderfoot, but I guess I was wrong, now wouldn't I be? Another thing Thunderfoot has been doing, and we've seen this in the discussion yesterday, is to denote an argument as a moot point, pedantry, irrelevant, and etc. The problem with that tactic is that Thunderfoot needs to support those claims. Those are positive claims. He cannot just say that and have it declared because he's Thunderfoot. This is something that he needs to back up the same as everyone else. And also, one thing that's really been torquing my gears lately is his definite need to go to ad populum attacks. One of the greatest examples of his going to ad populum was his polls, should I discuss this with D-Land and Cole or not? To me, that shows not really a great sign of leadership. Be a guy who knows he was caught and is wondering how to get out of it. And another thing is that that just because a majority thinks something is wrong does not necessarily mean that it's wrong. I think we have seen this through history. Do I really need to bring up points of how a population can think one thing and yet be totally and completely wrong? I certainly hope not. That brings us to the D-Land and Cole discussion. And of course, the first hour just absolutely blew little baby puppy dogs. This wasn't because really of either party's fault. It was really an hour of blog TV fail. When it started off, I had the feeling that Thunderfoot was kind of sidetracking a little bit, getting off the substantive points, as he would call it, and going on to an entirely different area. When the debate got back to on topic, on task, one of the first things brought up was Park 51. Of course, Park 51 is the so-called mosque at Ground Zero. Thunderfoot tried to use a Cordova versus Crusade analogy. I considered this to be nothing more than a comparison of apples to oranges. And it's like comparing a holy war to a city that was, conquested by the Muslims. That might seem to be a little bit of nitpicking. However, I think a proper analogy would have been comparing the word. It would be trying to compare the word jihad to something called the Temple Mount Center. A better analogy would have been crusade versus jihad, obviously, for obvious reasons. And of course, Thunderfoot, for some reason, had a hard time understanding that Park 51, if it is a mosque, is also a church and a synagogue. I think he did concede that point. Another thing that someone brought up in the main room was that a hospital with a chapel is not a church. So why would a community center with a prayer center suddenly become a mosque? Also, there's already a mosque closer to Ground Zero, and no one's been protesting that. I just think it's the idea that people are angry because someone dares build a mosque. And also, another thing is that Thunderfoot said that perhaps they would not budge on moving Park 51 further away from Ground Zero. My take on that is, why the hell should they? They already found a spot they liked. They decided to build. It is a part of Manhattan that is in dire need of some sort of construction, and people aren't liking this simply because Muslims are building a building. It's totally ridiculous. I know a lot of people are for this, but once again, that has been brought up, but that's once again that popular argument. And also, Thunderfoot brought up something to the effect of, do you support more mosques being built? D-Land Cole answered that very well, and I just want to go ahead and put my own take on that. I would support the right of all people of any belief system to build whatever type of building they wish on their own private property. And this brings me to the point of justice. This entire trying to, people sticking their nose on where a group of Muslims is going to build a building or not, that is not justice. As Socrates defined it in the Republic, justice is minding one's own business. This is a bunch of people minding other people's business, and by definition is an injustice. Another thing that really kind of ticked me off during the debate was when Thunderfoot started drawing the bell curve. That's wonderful, except for the fact that I didn't see any statistics to back it up, and also there are many shapes to the bell curve. The bell curve could have been flatter. The bell could have leaned to the left, could have leaned to the right. It could have done all of these things. And then, of course, he brought up a map. Basically, he did demonstrate a positive correlation between Islam and poverty. However, a correlation is well and good. Still, he did not demonstrate a causal relationship. So both of these tactics that are used by Thunderfoot, it's entirely unsupported, and it's mere speculation at best. And one thing I do want to bring up is that I would say there are some statements Thunderfoot made that definitely are a sign of bigotry. What are we going to do about Islam? That could be applied to any group. You could say, what are we going to do about the problem with Native Americans? What are we going to do with the problem of African Americans? What are we going to do with the problem of say, the Church of Latter-day Saints? And basically that brings me back to what I am for, and what I think most people on our side are for. And we're for freedom of individuals through a secular government, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Finally, as the show ended, and of course I didn't go through all the points, but as the show ended, Thunderfoot kind of asked Cole, well, who do you think pwned who? I didn't think this was about pwnage. So that's basically about it. I still have a lot of problems and concerns with Thunderfoot. He needs to apologize to Coughlin. He needs to change his debating tactics. And quite frankly, he needs to stop, actually start addressing valid arguments better. But then again, what do I know? I'm just a raspberrier. Therefore, whatever I say doesn't count, right?